Today we are continuing in our sermon series on the characters of the Bible that you selected back in the spring. We have a young man this morning for our character, which I thought was very appropriate. Major thanks to Ashley and Matt Moshane for being here last Sunday and sharing. I've already heard really positive things. Doesn't surprise me, except that it still rejoices my heart that y'all enjoyed them. I know they're amazing young people. Ashley, I've known for 5 years now, and so she has a special place in my heart. But I've come to know and love Matt some too. But I just thought that was interesting as I was preparing the sermon before I took that week of vacation. I thought this is going to be an interesting one to preach because after Ashley and Matt have been here, and I understand that they shared with you some of their vision of youth and young adults in this day and age and some of the cultural changes. Now, that's all hearsay. I didn't hear that directly from them. So hopefully that's pretty close. That's what I was told. And so anyway, this morning, though, we have a young man named Ezekiel. And Ezekiel got one vote from y'all, but he is a young Israelite who had been taken into exile along with their king and about 1,000 of his fellow, Israelite men and women. The good news here is that he was selected to go. And the reason I say that, if you want to call it good news, it means he had some stature, some prominence, because when they took the people, when the Babylonians came to raid them and take them, they left the worst of the people, the remnant that was left, were not considered as worthy. I want to be really, really clear here. That's not in God's sight. That was in the sight of the Babylonians. Okay, I want to be really clear. But this young man is chosen to go, he and his family. But they are taken into captivity in Babylon because God had warned them and they didn't heed the warnings. This was the whole nation of Israel. He had said, if you do not get back to me, do not come back to me, do not begin to live righteously, I am going to let you be captured. They didn't come back. God allowed them to be captured, taken away and enslaved. Now, they are not treated like the slaves were necessarily in Egypt before they were taken out of Egypt by Moses. They seem to live a fairly comfortable life. I don't want to imply that they were like laborers so much, but they are still not at home, and they are under the dominance of another nation. So they are not on par either with the Babylonians. They are still Israelites in a foreign land. So in the midst of this trying and less than hope-filled time in Ezekiel's life, he receives a call from God to be God's prophet, to speak for God. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment having God come and tell you to speak, and then telling you directly that the people you go to speak to are not going to listen to you. Because Ezekiel teaches us that we are to be obedient to God to speak when God calls us to. But we are not responsible to make people listen to us. We are to be obedient to God to speak when God calls us to. But we are not responsible to make people listen to us. Literally, God told Ezekiel in Ezekiel 2, verses 6 and 7, Son of man, do not fear them or their words. Do not be dismayed by their dark scowls. Don't you love that imagery, their dark scowls? Even though they are rebels. You must give them my messages whether they listen or not. Now get this. But they won't listen, for they're completely rebellious. Can you imagine? God says, okay, listen, I need you to go and I need you to speak. But by the way, let me just tell you up front, they're not going to listen to you. Do you think maybe Ezekiel thought, well then why should I go speak? God, do I really need to do this? God, really? Because you just told me they're not going to listen. Why am I going to waste my breath? Why am I going to waste my time? Why am I going to go if you know up front they're not going to hear me? They're not going to listen. They're not going to obey. The good news is, should we find ourselves speaking what we believe God has asked us to say, but not feeling like we're being heard, it may just take heart to us, give us heart and courage and bravery to realize Ezekiel did exactly what we are having happen to us. I don't know how you're feeling, but the way that culture continues to change, our American culture continues to change, just speaking that which I've spoke all along, just speaking the same truths I've held to all 55 years of my life, are being held in suspect, being at times met with dark scowls like, what? How foreign you seem. And it's like, I know it was shifting, but so quickly, so radically, so obviously countercultural all of a sudden. What courage, bravery, and trust to do what Ezekiel is asked to do, which is to prophesy about God's judgment toward his country, and then, don't miss this, to prophesy about God's ability to love, to forgive, and to heal, while they are in the midst of the consequences of their sinful rebellion against God. That, to me, is the crux of what Ezekiel's message is. Ezekiel comes to them not like Isaiah, Jeremiah, who had warned them ahead of time, don't do this. Get back to God. Stop disobeying. Ezekiel's prophecy comes to them when they're already gone into exile. And they're living lives in which they are suffering the consequences of their own choices, let me be clear, okay? But still, they're suffering consequences. So Ezekiel has to come to them and speak two things. First, God's judgment on them still. And again, we don't know fully, but it can be, I told you that's what was going to happen. I told you so. But then he proclaims to them hope in God for a future when it's hard to see that future when you're in exile in Babylon. You're pretty downhearted. Israel had been warned and they ignored those warnings. Now they're being punished for their own choices and their own willful disobedience. And God sends Ezekiel to give them hope in the midst. It's one thing to know what God is doing ahead of time and what you know he can do. And it's another thing to look back with 20/20 hindsight and be able to see where God's faithful. But sometimes it's really hard in the midst of the circumstances to find that faith and that hope and that good news. Because we just feel overwhelmed by the circumstances, do we not? Ezekiel was called to be God's prophet in the midst of Israel's exile and punishment. While Israel suffered the consequences of their disobedience, Ezekiel proclaimed hope that God would restore them. This, again, I say, is the crux to me of the story of Ezekiel, because it is hope in the midst. Punishment and hope, but in the midst of the actual experience. So Ezekiel's called to be God's prophet in the midst of Israel's exile and punishment, while Israel suffers the consequences of their disobedience. Ezekiel proclaims hope that God would restore them. Hope in the midst of the punishment they brought on themselves. It can be very awkward, but it's still very good. I couldn't help but think when I was preparing this sermon of a situation in my own life, and most of you know, you've worshiped here very long at all, that I don't think I was the worst child in the world. I really do not. However, I will never proclaim that I was the most compliant or easiest child to raise. And there are numerous occasions in which little Claudia Jean Holmes, who I was then, got sent to her room, got denied privileges. I got spanked. I was raised in a time where spankings happened. I did not like them, but as an adult, I will defend them as long as the day is long, whatever that phrase is. I messed up. But I will always say, well, actually, there was one thing I got a spanking for that I did do a second time, but I didn't do it anymore after that. But nothing else that I ever got a spanking for did I do again, because the message got across loud and clear. I was not to be doing those things. Again, didn't like it at all in the moment it happened. And I thought about that time, though, in particular one day. I remember, I think I know what I did, but I will not tell that. Just because it has some personal, I just will not share with y'all. But anyway, my mother found out and grabbed the first thing she could and gave me a spanking with her hairbrush. And a moment of passion. Rightfully so, because what I was being punished for, if I am right that that was the day, I had been told numerous times, and it had to do with being clean and cleaning up after myself. And long story short, she grabs a hairbrush, and I remember her spanking me several times, with it. And I remember, I'm thinking I'm about 8 or 9 years old, and I remember consciously saying, "You just wait, the day will come and I'll get you over my knee, and I'm going to spank you." That's the only time I remember really visualizing that there would be a day and I was going to get big enough and old enough and I was going to get control of that woman and I was going to spank her little behind. Well, needless to say, there's been a number of years I probably could have pulled that off, but by the time I got to that phase of my life, as most of you realize, I had no need to do that. But what did happen is I took off to my room and I was so mad. I didn't like that spanking. I didn't like someone controlling me. And I didn't like the fact that I had been punished at all. But what I didn't like even more than that, and the rub in this whole situation was I didn't like that I disappointed my mom. And as mad as I was with her, I can remember sitting, my room was upstairs. My parents had a master bedroom downstairs, and now all 3 of our bedrooms were upstairs. And I was upstairs in my pink bedroom, and I can remember sitting in that room, though, and feeling mad, didn't want to see anybody, especially not my mother, and yet the deepest heart's desire was to see my mom and to know that it was going to be okay. And I thought about that whole experience. I thought about what that felt like to have suffered the consequences of what I had done and not done what I had been told numerous times to do. Obviously, I survived the punishment, I would say, and ended up better for it. But I can remember waiting, and in a little while, here came my mom's footsteps. And she knocked on the door, and she came in. And she just sat on the bed, and I don't know if she cuddled me, if she held me. I know there was that mixture of not wanting to see her and desperately wanting to see her. And I think about Israel. Here they are banished to Babylon for their disobedience. And yet deep in their heart, they know they have broken relationship with the God who loves them. And they want to be reinstated. They know. I mean, even that day, I knew she was right. I had been warned. I just didn't want to suffer consequences for not having done it again. But I remember the joy deep down of having that reconciliation. That's what our little character of the week, Ezekiel, gets to prophesy about. And he does a beautiful job of letting God have full control of his life and his home so that he can share with Israel in the midst of their suffering the hope of reconciliation and restoration. Listen to some, just quickly, things that Ezekiel does. He sees visions. He sees a wheel within a wheel, which is an amazing scripture. He sees a valley filled with dry bones. And when we did our series 3 or 4 years ago where we worked all the way through the Bible, when we got to Ezekiel, someone that is worshiping with us this morning came to worship that morning with a dry bone around his neck. I'm not going to share who it was, but if I were to share it, it would be John Webner. But I'm not going to do that. Anyway, but Ezekiel sees this valley of dry bones and says, can there be life? And then the Spirit says, is there life? And he goes, I don't think so. But those dry bones start taking on flesh, and they become an entire army. Listen to this one. Ezekiel is asked to lose his wife. His wife died, and he loved her. He cherished her. But he is commanded by the Spirit not to publicly mourn her death, as an example that Israel is not to mourn the fall of Jerusalem. So he has to suck it up publicly and not go into mourning over his wife, because he is commanded by God to not mourn as a display of the fact that Israel is not to mourn over the fall of Jerusalem. If that wasn't enough, he is told at one point to lie on his left side for 390 days. That's a year and a month. Okay? 390 days he lays on his side, 1 day for every year of Israel's sin. And when he's done with his left side, he has to turn on his right side and lie on that for 40 more days. Thank you, God. Judah only rebelled 40 additional years. And so he lays on his back, or his sides, for 430 days to represent the 430 years that God has put up with the ups and the downs, and the kings that were good and the kings that were bad, and the ins and the outs of Israel and Judah's unfaithfulness. I put in the sermon. Makes you want to have God call you, doesn't it? Oh, God, please use me. Just please don't use me like you did Ezekiel. I don't really want to lose my spouse and not mourn publicly. I don't want to lay on my side for a year and a month, and then turn over and lay another 40 days on the other side. I don't want that, God. I don't really want to go and tell people that don't want to listen to me a message. But Ezekiel didn't do any of that. Ezekiel didn't. He didn't rebel. He didn't say no. He proclaimed God's judgment, and then he proclaimed God's hope for restoration. And that is why we're all the way at chapter 36 in Ezekiel for our text this morning. Because when I prayed over what part of Ezekiel to focus on, this seemed to be where the Spirit led us. So we get all the way through all of this, and then God, speaking through Ezekiel, has this to say in our text. Chapter 36, verse 22. Therefore, give the people of Israel this message from the sovereign Lord, and listen to these gorgeous words. I am bringing you back. I'm bringing you back. But not because you deserve it, God said to them. I'm doing it to protect my holy name, on which you brought shame while you were scattered among the nations. I will show how holy my great name is, the name on which you brought shame among the nations. And when I reveal my holiness through you before their very eyes, says the sovereign Lord, then the nations will know that I am the Lord. God says, I'm bringing you back, but it's not because you deserve to be brought back, but I'm doing it to preserve my name, because you have just smashed my name before the nations. And I'm not going to stand for that, because I know I'm holy, God says. And I know you may not have betrayed that well, but I'm going to help you have another chance. Because I want the nations to see what's available to them. Much like the nation of Israel, God's redemption of us not only blesses and frees us, but it's a witness to those who know us and see us, to give them hope for what God can do in them also. God takes our rebellion and our broken lives, which are redeemed by God's grace, and he displays his holiness to those around us. Sometimes we focus so much on what we get from it, because we get a whole lot, and we do. But the purpose of it, he lays out here through Ezekiel with the nation of Israel, is so that God is glorified, so that God gets the glory. Then he goes on to give them more hope. He says, for I will gather you up from all the nations and bring you home again to your land. You're not going to stay in a foreign place. You're not going to stay where you don't belong. You're not going to stay where you're really not a citizen. You're going to get to go home. Then I will, then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. Your filth will be washed away, and you will no longer worship idols. This verse, 26, and I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. And I will put my spirit in you so that you will follow my decrees and be careful to obey my regulations. Do you get all the I's in that with God speaking? I will do this for you. I will bring you home. I will replace your stony, stubborn heart. I will give you a tender, repentant heart. I will put my spirit in you so you have the power to follow my decrees and to obey my regulations. And you will live in Israel, the land I gave your ancestors long ago. You will be my people, and I will be your God. I will cleanse you of your filthy behavior. I will give you good crops of grain, and I will send no more famines on the land. I will give you the great harvest from your fruit trees and fields, and never again will the surrounding nations be able to scoff at your land for its famines. God comes to the nation of Israel through Ezekiel and offers them restoration and redemption while they're in the midst of the punishment of their brought on themselves rebellion. To me, that's like the loving parent that comes and sits and says, it's okay. You're not going to stay here forever. Because I know we can do better than we did today. The punishment, the consequences of their rebellion are not for punishment's sake. That, for all my, go to your room, you can't go out with friends. I was on another one in 8th grade, a whole 6 weeks. You may not be able to learn, but you can keep your mouth shut. They don't even do conduct grades anymore in 8th grade. That was my mother and father's version, I never got punished for my grades, but for my conduct, in 8th grade English, I was banished to my room. For 6 weeks, I could go out one time in 7 days with my friends. But I never got another C in conduct. Yeah, I even know the teacher that gave it to me. Okay. I'm sure it wasn't my fault that I was talking. Because I'm such a shy wallflower as it is. Those punishments never were just because they had nothing else to do that day or because they had a bad day. I really wasn't the dog that got kicked at the end of the day. In fact, I look back as a parent, after many years, looked back and thought of the numerous times they didn't punish me and should have. So I have this great understanding of a God who comes and says, I didn't want you to suffer. I don't want you punished. But I'm not going to let you rebel and not suffer the consequences because they're lessons in repentance and lessons in forgiveness you've got to learn. Now, I'm still not a perfect person, but believe me, if Jean Randolph Holmes hadn't spent so much time on me, Lord knows what I would be like, okay? That's what Israel is receiving through Ezekiel, who's receiving it from God. It's this whole message of, I have punished you, I've watched you, and you've suffered the consequences, and hopefully you've learned your lesson. And they do. They're going to be much more faithful. They're still not going to be able to do it on their own, which is why a Savior comes in Jesus Christ. But Ezekiel is in the midst of the suffering with them and offering them these gorgeous words of hope. I liked the version of the Message, though, which is the Bible in contemporary language for chapter 36, verse 26. It says, I will give you a new heart, put a new spirit in you. This is God that's going to do this. I'll remove the stone heart from your body and replace it with a heart that's God-willed, not self-willed. And I thought that was a great way to think of it. Because the New Living Translation hadn't done a bad job. It had just said, you will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. But I can better understand to have a heart that's God-willed, not Claudia-willed, not self-willed. There we have the message of Ezekiel. The God who loves us enough to discipline us when we need it, loves us also way enough to help change our hearts for us, to help move us from focusing on ourselves to focus instead on God and God's will for us. So I don't know about you, but this morning it makes me want to say thank you, Ezekiel. Thank you for laying on your side, for seeing visions, for opening our eyes to grace and healing and forgiveness. Thank you for sending this word in the midst of the times in my life when I haven't done what I knew I was supposed to. And I'm so longing to be reconciled to the God that I know I have failed. Thank you, Ezekiel. Amen.